So I think I've been a storyteller all my life, and I think we all are.
Yes.
And I think storytelling helps me heal. Storytelling in our community, in the Black community, right, is what we've relied on, right? Because we're oral people, and we don't know anything but what Mama told us and Grandma told us, and that's what's passed on. So I think that just the idea of talking to each other is a part of the resilience that is in ours. What do you guys think about that?
Wow, that's a big, that just hit me, that, because I think about when my grandfather first passed, and it was a shock to us. I said to myself, I have to sit down with my grandmother. I have to sit down with my mother, my aunts. It was important because I said, I can't lose any more history. It means so much. And so I feel like my name carries on because of those stories that we told each other. And even just like in our community, Janae, the fact that you guys are working on, over at your team are working on the Charles Stewart story.
Wow.
And how I was sharing with you how my father and my uncles were stopped in Boston during that time.
Yeah,
Liz.
my husband was stopped then, my ex-husband. But yeah, that was a crazy time.
Yeah, and it's those stories that the family was saying to each other about the biggest story in Boston at that time. That narrative is the way that we tell stories in the family, and then we as a community and as our profession tell the stories.
Right, right.
I think when I think about storytelling, what makes it a resistance to me and resilience is partly why I created A Beautiful Resistance, is because, if you don't have a family and elders and grandparents, or you're displaced from your family in any way, then all you have is what the education system and the justice system in America tells you or assigns to you to be your narrative. And we know in our country and in this world is such a hierarchy. And the first thing any dominant culture takes from the subculture is their story and their art. So if all you're told is that you're not good enough, or you're not equal to, or they separate you from your true history, then you need to have storytelling and journalists and your grandparents and your elders and your aunties and uncles and yourself to claim that space and claim that truth and really resist the urge to believe the lies that we're fed about ourselves as Black people and other folks of color in the community. So to me, that's what makes storytelling and journalism such a resistance, because we have the agency and power, and that's what makes, the grandmother or the church auntie so special, because, the grandfather that can tell you those stories, how the word is passed, and give you that grit and grace to push on when the world is telling you no and you can say yes.
We live in a world that has been trying to silence us and has been silencing us forever.
Oh, yeah.
Since we came on ships here, that we have no story. And a world that's trying to narrate their story on us, on our backs. And to come up and survive, we had to have our own stories. I was just writing about the idea that when I first found I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings, it saved my life. And that was back in 1969. I had gone through desegregation. I hated everybody. It was a horrible experience.
You just hated everybody.
I hated my folks. I hated for sending me to that school. I hated white people. I hated everybody. But when I read Maya Angelou's words, she gave me dignity. I had shame about that period in my life because I was led to believe that there was something wrong with me. Discovering that book, discovering James Baldwin and as a child, discovering Black voices that had broken through a silence, it was life-changing for me growing up way back in the day. So those stories, you're a continuum of those stories. There's one story. The one story is where we're headed, right? But you have to get there, and we have to keep telling our stories. And right now we're living in a time, I feel like I'm preaching, so y'all need to stop.
Please.
No, I want to be preached over.
No, you blessed, you blessed. But we're living in a time where you see the latest iteration of this silencing. This has been going on forever. It's not new. And you just have to keep your story there. You have to keep breaking through your own silence. That's the real issue. So anyway, that's my story.
we're not the story because we're journalists. We're usually not the story. And so when George Floyd was murdered brutally, and the entire country, the entire world was looking to us to sort of make sense of this as journalists of color, and then as Black people, I found myself being the story. And that was fine, but I was going through my own personal stuff as well. And, you know, my mom had just died, and I said to myself, I cannot carry another thing, you know? And so it was that time that I'm like, still trying, we're in a pandemic, I'm trying to be a television person, I'm trying to meet the stereotypical standards of what I'm supposed to look like. And I lost my mom, and I said to myself, I'm worried about my husband driving the streets and with George Floyd's murder. And I said, I cannot be anybody else but myself for once. I cannot listen to the consultant. I cannot listen to whatever the boss's name is and was. And so I went to my supervisor and said, listen, I need to at least stop playing the hair TV game. And the game, I need to stop playing the game with my hair. I can't wear another relaxer. I can't talk to my daughter and say, be proud of your curls because you're getting teased, but then I'm not proud of it when I'm on air. And so I think the management at that time, and my station at least, was ready for that conversation. I didn't think that they would say yes to me giving up the relaxer and what I thought was going to make audiences feel comfortable with me. And they said yes. They said, do what you want to do. And so I made an appointment on Blue Hill Avenue. I said, let me get my hair braided. And it's been more than 2 years. And I was nervous because I'd never felt that freedom. And I wondered what not only Black people were going to say, but what white and whoever else. And I've been super surprised that I've not received a negative comment. Maybe they've come into my station, has filtered them out, I don't know, but I doubt that. And I would every now and then, even 2 years later, get messages from a woman of whatever descent, European descent, who says, I have naturally curly hair and I've struggled. And it's more than just hair, it's about being seen and just being yourself. People come up to me all the time, and it's usually not people of color because this is not big for people of color. Braids, you know, it's nothing. But also little girls who, they don't even know that it means something to them. Just like when I leap on you every time I see you and say, Liz, you're a big deal to me. You're like, sister. And I said, no, because you don't know what being a deliciously tall Black woman with a vibrant smile and showing up every day for me when I was living in a housing project, watching the news. You don't know what that meant to me. So I hope that I mean something to, you know, another little girl who looks like me or who doesn't look like me, but sees me just being absolutely comfortable in my own skin.
I'm not a little girl and you mean something to me. I mean, and I would also say the braids aren't nothing. As another Black journalist who wears big braids, big curls, and big hoops all the time, I can tell you that, you know, the younger Black women in my office have said to me, like, you know, when I see you walking in the office being your whole self, it gives me permission to be my whole self. So even if they're not saying it to you, there is a snowball effect. I'm not in broadcast. You know, I have a docuseries, but I'm not in broadcast. And I've had other Black women in broadcast say to me, I love it when you wear your big braids, because they also were like wanting to wear big braids. So I think you being you creates a domino effect. And like when I see you, I love when I like go to an event and I hear your big voice boom across the stage and that big smile. And I'm like, look at all this Black joy. Yes. So the braids aren't nothing. Right. All of this is not like, it's not even like hoping you mean so you do. Like you being you and you being you, it means something to all of us.
Absolutely.
Like, and I know that's not the answer to the question, but I needed to.
Thank you.
And from where we've come, I mean, I remember the days, oh God, I've been in TV so long, back in the day when I was told to put braces on my teeth because I had a gap in my front. I was told to wear my hair straight and get a wig and all kinds of things because I didn't look. And I tried. I always tried to be something that I wasn't. And it was very frustrating, and actually it was a little traumatic to try to please somebody else. So to see you, and to see you, I don't care what your hair likes, just to see you here, it's just, and just to hear you and read you, oh my God, this is huge for me. It's really beautiful.
When I think about, I don't know, like personal story, I'm thinking about what you're saying and what you're saying about, I know what the cage bird sings, and then just like the lynching of George Floyd, I feel like was a point for all of us, and it took us many places.
Yep.
I was in Minneapolis at that funeral, and being there and being at that intersection is kind of what led to me creating A Beautiful Resistance. And I don't know, when I think about my personal story, because I'm a little different, because I'm a columnist, so sometimes I am the story as a columnist. But I feel like because of how I grew up, which was, you know, very much loved, but also very much alone. It was like loved, but in longing, if that makes sense. You know, my mother is white, and she died like 7 years ago. And I think when George Floyd was lynched, all I could think about was like, what would my mom say if she was here? Would she even know how to comfort me? Because my sister is white, and she did not know how to comfort me. It was like a very fraught time. And then my dad was telling me things that he had never told me in my life, like that my black family didn't even meet me till I was 4, because they didn't even like the fact that he had a mixed child who was so light-skinned. And I didn't even know that. Like, I knew about my mom's family not rocking with me, but I never knew that until my dad he kept that a secret all the way until the pandemic times. And I think I had my own, while the world was having an alleged reckoning, which it was not a real reckoning, but an alleged reckoning, I feel like I was having a personal reckoning. And because I've covered Black death for so long as a journalist, I was like, how am I covering Black life? And that is what made me want to create A Beautiful Resistance. It was like I was thinking about my life, how I see myself. And even though I'm fighting, in my mind, I'm like, I'm fighting injustice. I'm always writing about the murders of Black people and the oppression of Black people. And I was looking around in journalism and thinking, how come you never see a story about Black joy, or like the Black person who had the biggest squash at the farmer's market the way you do for white folks? And it just made me deeply sad. And it also made me wonder, like, do I just run around carrying all this rage all the time? And has that become like who I am to people? Is it who I am to myself? So I was like, of course I'm gonna always cover those stories, but I was like, I wanna create a space for our joy. And also I needed it. I felt like I was struggling to have it for myself. So I feel like that is, when I think about my personal story and my professional story, it was really like my journey for like collective healing, collective community, and just fighting for my own joy and love and trying to see it in others.
One of the things that I'm most humbled by now in this season of my life is running a trauma program in the Roxbury, and now it's in Providence, Rhode Island, and other places. And it started initially to talk about our pain, but what has happened is we're just talking now. People are talking. People want to talk about everything. And we're talking across racial lines. We're talking across age lines. A very simple premise. This is not rocket science, but it's so important. Just the idea of exchanging. I'd like to sit here and hear you tell me about your background and tell me about your struggle. That moves me. That changes me. I didn't know that. I've read you. I haven't read all of your things, but I now am more than I was when I sat in the seat, because now I know something about you.
Exactly.
And that's the empathy and the compassion and the growth that we have for each other when we have the courage and to be vulnerable and share. So all of that, I think, helps us. But we live in a world, I should write a book called We Live in a World. We live in a world where we just don't want to do that. We're afraid. We don't want to put ourselves really out there. I know I haven't wanted to.
Right.
Because I thought somebody would shut me down or tell me something's wrong. And I already knew everything that was wrong. So this is what we need more of in our communities, in our families. we grow up in families with, what happens in this family stays in this family.
Right.
I grew up in that kind of family, and I'm just dealing with things. So our joy has always been there. That's how we survive. But we've never, really let that out because we're so caught up in our pain.
You're so right. Because when you think, Boston has this whole big reputation, of course earned, but not always true, I believe now. And I'm a big Boston fan, despite our history, where, it's so segregated. Still, if you go through neighborhoods to this day, in my mind, it's still pretty segregated. But what I love, I always tell people of color who come here, I say, give it a moment, number one. Somebody usually has to, unfortunately, vouch for you, I think. We've talked about this, Janae, as a relatively newcomer to Boston, that people have to vouch for you. But what I find, I think the reason why I connect with people in my Dorchester neighborhood, we were Vietnamese, we are Haitian, we are Irish, we're whatever. What we connected with is the human experience. And I think in journalism, it's that way. The reason I think you become great journalists if the story is the human story. And so, of course, there are layers to our identity that make us true to who we are as a culture. But I want to hear your story. I want to hear the Irish story, and the Haitian story and the Vietnamese story as Bostonians, as much as I want to hear my Southern Black root story. And I think people want to hear that if you are telling the truth. And I think people can immediately hear whether it's phony or whether it's not, and I think that's the way, no matter if you're watching the news and you see a story and you see a child hurt, well, if you tell me the circumstances of this child being beaten by their father to death, and now I care about that story, obviously, no matter what color they are, because I'm telling the humanity of the story. So that's the way I think in journalism that we get to the heart of it. And I think you enter this field because, at least for me, you fall in love with telling that story and you can't get enough of it because you want to, this person, even if they're gone, has something to say.
Well, it's where the love is. If you lead with love, true love, agape love, if you lead with that real love, it crosses all color lines, all identities, all generations. When you lead with love and the truth, and I don't believe you're leading with love if the truth is not involved.
Exactly.
Then everyone's invited. And that's one of the things, sometimes people will say, well, what do you mean Black joy? What do you mean Black love? And I always say to them, when have you ever seen Black love or Black joy that has not liberated others to also delight in themselves? Anytime we are free, it involves the freedom of others. So when you're leading with love, you're automatically walking the path of liberation in my mind. So it's like you have to always center humanity. And it's even as someone who mostly, centers Black folks and folks of color, there's lots of white readers and white people who attend my events. And I feel like they see themselves in it no different than we've seen ourselves in their stories, in their films, in their heroes all of our lives. Because when you're leading with love and truth and empathy, those are the bridges. That's how we move together. I mean, access. I think, the digital world has created a level of access we never had before. And I say that recognizing that there is a digital divide and there are still people who don't have enough access to the digital world. But it has democratized voices, democratized space. RIP Twitter, it's X, it's chaos now. But when Twitter first started, I feel like it really allowed voices of color to be heard, to chime in. We saved TV shows, we saved lives, we fought justice. It galvanized and mobilized people in a way that I think hadn't been seen before and passed the word quicker. I think about the BPP and how they had their paper. And it's like now we have the internet to get those messages across.
Yep.
So I think it's deeply empowering and democratizing, but it's also polarizing. And dangerous, and in a way that it allows us to build these silos that are echo chambers and propaganda and lies. So we really have to be mindful of teaching critical thinking, of empowering our people to kind of ask questions and fact check. But what's beautiful and what I see for the future is more and more people having agency in how stories are told and who is at the center, and removing the oppressive gaze.
Can I just ask both of you, are you optimistic? Because it does seem that we're at this like precipice. I mean, it can go either way. We want it to be wonderful, but there are lots of dangers about social media and digital. There's so many attacks. So where do you get your optimism from?
Well, I choose joy. It's a choice, but you're right. It's scary. I mean, when you think about AI's role and the fact that, number one, it could replace all lazy form of journalism that I think is out there, because still original thought is original thought, and there's always a place for that. But I think about my daughter, who is 17 years old, and I think about how she reads everything, I think, from social media sources first. She doesn't watch the news first, even though her mother is on TV every day. And so even though she believes, our traditional journalism, I think she gets her makeup tips. I think she gets her information about elections. I think she gets her information about global affairs, all through forms of social media that I don't normally go to first. And so I feel, because I know my daughter is doing it, I'm sure my son, who's 7, will do it. I have to believe in that there's some value to it. We just have to figure out what that is. And I think it's on the traditional journalistic companies that we have to figure out a way to get that message and be smart about it, because it's going to pass us by if we don't get on this sooner. And I know that every company is working right now to try and monetize it and make it work for them. I have to believe it's hopeful. I don't want to think of it as a Terminator society where the robots kill us and we don't know what we're doing. So I have to choose joy, but we have to be proactive and not lazy.
It's such a good question. I think part of it is, I woke up today, which means I'm possible, which means you're possible. And then the other part of it is Zora Neale Hurston. If I'm silent about my pain, they'll kill me and say I enjoyed it. And I think about that with the internet and like the attacks all the time, because I'm dealing with harassment right now. Like, I have security that will attend my public event tonight because that just happens.
Yep.
in large part because of the digital world. But I'm not going to stay at home. You're not going to stop me from being who I am, from standing in my light. And the bigger part of that is how I stay optimistic. Is liberation isn't a destination, it's a journey. And if I don't have hope, there's no fuel for that train so that I can help cultivate the next generation of conductors.